Hey everybody, welcome to the latest edition of Take 5. Today I want to talk to you about documenting your investigation process. In other words, effective documentation practices as we move through the course of an investigation. Now, the thing that I'm sometimes stunned to learn is the lack of documentation that some investigators engage in. In other words, an investigator will engage in taking notes or documenting an interview, but they're not documenting the pieces in between. They're not documenting the communications they have related to setting up interviews, the communications they have in relation to obtaining information and documentation. All of the little pieces of an investigation that happen need to be documented somewhere so that down the road, which could be years, frankly, when you're testifying in a disciplinary hearing, if you're in a regulatory investigation or you're testifying in an arbitration, that you're able to go back and look at your file and bring yourself back to the day you did that investigation. If you can't do that, if your notes and your file can't bring you back to the day you did the investigation or the days when you did the investigation, so you remember all those details, then your notes are lacking. You have to have detailed, comprehensive notes that you take when you conduct your investigations. Now, I'm going to talk about a couple of different areas. So I just talked about the note taking in between the key pieces of evidence gathering, like interviewing. But when we're interviewing, you're taking your notes as you go. You should be recording the interview, audio recording the interview. If you're using Teams or that type of online communication, you could even be video recording. Nowadays, you can transcribe. And all of this is, of course, with the permission of the person you're interviewing, but these are very important things. A transcription of the interview is lovely. I mean, if you can get an accurate transcriber, and with AI and the new advances that we're seeing happening so rapidly in technology, these things are available. There's no excuse not to have a very, very detailed outline of the interviews that you conduct. Obviously it's got to contain the basics, right? So when you're taking notes, for example, in an interview, the date, the time, the location, how the interview took place. Was it in person? Was it over the phone? Was it online? Who was present? Were there support people present? Was there a legal counsel present? Was there a union representative present? All of these things have to be documented. I would also document, did the other people on the call, or you won't know if they're on the call, but if you're in the room, did they take notes? Are they documenting things? All of these are important things that need to be detailed. And then when you're taking your notes during an interview, you're going to be very detailed, or as detailed as you can be. This is why I love recordings, because I can go back and I can re-listen to what happened in that interview to make sure that I got things correct. These are all very important practices. The one thing that I feel many investigators put themselves at risk around is when these notes are full of opinions. Your notes do not need to reflect opinions ever. Whether it's an interview note, whether it's a note you're making in the file, none of these things need to outline opinions. I read reports sometimes, and a person will include within the report the details that was shared with them by one or more of the parties involved in the investigation. And when I read these notes, I often see things that are clearly an elaboration on what was said, with where the investigator thinks that they are providing clarity, but they're not. I mean, they might be providing clarity, but at the same time, they're putting their words on what a person told them. The documentation of an interview should be restricted to what that person said, full of quotes, if not quotes, paraphrasing, but paraphrasing and making it clear you're paraphrasing. This is how documentation of an interview should take place. It has to be the statement of the person, not what you think. When somebody says, the person treated me so poorly by saying negative things about my work in front of my coworkers. Great. And then they go on to say, that made me feel belittled. That demeaned me. Great. And then you go on to say, which is clearly a violation of blah, 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 or you're adding in pieces, you're adding in context that doesn't belong there. The place for you to add context, the place for you to evaluate the evidence you've gathered and speak to it and opine on it is in the conclusionary aspect of your report, not in the notes or in the summary of the interviews you've conducted. So documentation is critical, but there's a place for certain types of documentation and a place where it doesn't belong at all. If you look at a file of an investigation I'm completing, you would never see anything in that file that speaks to my opinion about anything. Do I have opinions? Of course I do. That's my job. Particularly when I'm doing a workplace investigation, I'm going to have opinions. I'm going to have to articulate those opinions based on the evidence. But everything's based on the evidence. What I want that file to contain is a clean, clear copy of everything that's evidentiary. When I write my report, that's when I'm going to use that material and start extrapolating, start expounding on it, start presenting it in a way that creates the context so it can be understood and it can be clear what my conclusions are and why I'm making the conclusions I'm making. But that doesn't happen anywhere in my note-taking of my investigation. I'm documenting everything I do, but I'm doing it in an objective, clear way that simply is about the facts and the information I've gathered, not my opinions. So it's a fine line, right? Effective documentation practices involve documenting everything, but documenting it in a way that is free of opinion, free of conclusions, until you get to that one little spot in that report where that's your job, is to draw conclusions, provide decisions, and give reasons. That's the one place your opinion matters. Nowhere else in the documentation. So be careful when you're interviewing people. Don't add your own thoughts. Don't add your own opinions. When you're doing any aspect of your investigation, make sure your documentation is objective and clear. Even in a situation where somebody might behave badly, you might be interviewing somebody and they might behave badly, at least badly in your opinion. You do not have to document that they behaved badly, that they became belligerent or rude or whatever. You are going to document the facts. The person raised their voice. The person slammed their fist on the table. The person called the investigator quotes, and then insert your quote. But you don't go on to say the person was rude, belligerent, inappropriate, unprofessional. Those are subjective conclusions on the behavior. There may be a time and a place for you to engage in that, but it's not going to be in the notes that you're taking at the time. So again, just keep it neutral, but document. There's nothing worse than getting called to testify to something a year later, 2 years later, and having no recollection of what happened and no ability to go back and remember what happened. Even when it comes to obtaining information, somebody sent you a document. How did I receive that document? In what order were the pages? Scan them. Make sure that you're able to say, I received this document. It was 22 pages and it was in this order. These are little details that really demonstrate your professionalism and your attention to detail, which is oftentimes tested at different stages, particularly if you find yourself in a position where you're having to testify and withstand the scrutiny that your investigation may undertake. Or undergo. So with that, I'll stop there. Thanks again for listening. If you like these videos and you're enjoying this content, please subscribe to us. We'd love to have more subscribers. We're building them every day, but the more subscribers, the better. And then we'll continue to bring great content to you. So thanks again for listening. And that's it for this edition of Take 5.